la bestialidad imperialista. Bestialidad que no tiene una frontera determinada ni pertenece a un país determinado. Bestias fueron las hordas hitleristas, como bestias son los norteamericanos hoy, como bestias son los paracaidistas belgas, como bestias fueron los imperialistas franceses en Argelia. Porque es la naturaleza del imperialismo la que bestializa a los hombres, la que la convierte en fieras sedientas de sangre que están dispuestas a degollar, a asesinar, a destruir hasta la última imagen de un revolucionario, de un partidario de un régimen que haya caído bajo su bota o que luche por su libertad. Y la estatua que recuerda a Lumumba, hoy destruida pero mañana reconstruida, nos recuerda también en la historia trágica de ese mártir de la revolución del mundo, que no se puede confiar en el imperialismo, pero ni tantito, nada.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to episode 8 of Unmasking Imperialism, the media war on China, exposing mainstream media coverage of the People's Republic of China and the Chinese Communist Party. And today, joining us is our good comrade, a good friend, somebody who I have mad respect for in terms of video production, debunking imperialist lies, debunking propaganda, somebody who has produced some really high quality content from an anti-imperialist perspective. Bay Area 415, a Latino Marxist-Leninist attorney and host of the Comrade Report. Please subscribe to his channel, youtube.com/Bay Area 415. How's it going, comrade?
Thanks, comrade, for inviting me. Glad to be here, and love your show too. Love your last documentary, as we talked about, and really, really good stuff. I see a lot of great stuff coming from here too. So solidarity, and hopefully we can work together.
That's what's up, comrade. It's good to hear that. I appreciate that. And for those who haven't checked it out yet, on my channel, Nicaragua Against Empire, I recently came back from Nicaragua, documented the accomplishments and the successes of the Sandinista revolution. I actually got a shirt on, Leales Siempre, Traidores Nunca, with Sandino, Augusto César Sandino, Carlos Fonseca, Daniel Ortega, let's see, Hugo Chavez, and Fidel. Of course, Fidel. I was talking to the comrade earlier. I was like, yo, if I go back to Nicaragua, I'm going to get some more shirts and make them available to people, because our people in Latin America are producing some really beautiful styles, clothing, and content that we need to share. And unfortunately, there's a big disconnect there. So that's something that we hope to promote more. But today we're going to be talking about China. China is obviously not as big in the headlines right now because of a lot of the stuff going on in Palestine. And my solidarity, first and foremost, to the people of Palestine, to the people of Gaza who are resisting this settler colonial project known as the State of Israel. And it's really beautiful to see the resistance of the Palestinian people against this Zionist state that represses humans, that sees Palestinians and Muslims and Arabs as lower class and as not as equal to themselves. But I think something on the horizon that me and Comrade Bay Area were talking about is that we're going to start to see the pivot over to attacking China once again. I think the empire, the Eye of Sauron, if any Lord of the Rings fans out there, the Eye of Sauron temporarily took its gaze off of China to focus on other countries. But now I think it's going to start to pivot back to China. And I think one of the main narratives that I'm seeing more is the so-called Uyghur genocide, the so-called Uyghur ethnic cleansing. Uyghurs are majority Muslim people in the western region of Xinjiang in China, that Western media and the imperialists claim that the People's Republic of China is repressing. We're going to get into debunking some of that. Comrade Bay Area 415 has a great video on his channel debunking this, extended. Go and check that out. I think it's at over 70K views. Please make sure to check that out to go into depth. But we're going to talk about that because that's the way the imperialist propaganda machine works, is that they build up a narrative, they build up a hero and an enemy, and then they gain enough momentum to try to execute some of their imperialist strategies. And I think that this media war in China is ultimately destined to launch a new war against China. I mean, this war has been ongoing in different forms, sanctions and trade, but I think it unfortunately might escalate under the administration of Joe Biden. And before we get into some of the clips, we have some clips from mainstream media feeding us the typical lies about China being an imperialist country, putting countries into a so-called debt trap, about being poor and being a capitalist empire, and again about ethnically cleansing Uyghurs. We're going to debunk some of that. Before we get into that, Comrade Bay Area 415, I wanted to ask you about your thoughts on the coming war on China, where U.S.-China relations stand now, and why we as leftists, as principled anti-imperialists, should be defending China.
Well, it's still high. Despite what's going on with Israel and Palestine, obviously imperialists do not like competition. And China is the biggest competition, not only because they are providing a different pathway towards the global south being the primary exploited resource for imperialists, but by showing the world that, hey, we can help you by not giving loans that are so lopsided against you that you're going to be indebted for years. You don't have to change your governments. You don't have to change anything. You can build and develop your society as necessary, and we can provide you the funding, and we'll treat you as an equal trading partner in the global marketplace, so to speak, compared to the United States and Western, foreign aid model, which is just nothing more than just, funneling money through the top, and none of it's going down to the people. A lot of corruption and a lot of chaos, and that's what the West fuels their exploitation on. So, long story short, when China presents itself as an alternative, imperialists are really going mad. Their export capital is being sort of wasted in trying to compete, when in reality they had a monopoly in exploiting the global south all of this time. So, we'll probably touch a little bit more on the Belt and Road Initiative and what China is doing, and a little bit about Deng Xiaoping's sort of, essence of what he was trying to do with his opening up and reform, not only for other communist countries, but also for the global south, to lead a pathway towards economic prosperity without heeding to capitalist influences. But ultimately, I do think, the tensions are rising, and whether or not there's going to be an actual war or a Cold War 2.0, but I honestly think we're seeing the beginnings of a Cold War 2.0, but it's mainly due to China's rise, and that has to be stopped for Western imperialists.
And it seems like everything the Western imperialist powers accuse China of doing are the very same things that Western imperialists have done to China itself. I mean, even if we go back a few hundred years, in talking about China, we have to zoom out and look at the historical context of what's going on, because I feel like a lot of the way that the US-China conflict is being covered is both sides are equally as powerful, both sides are equally powerful and rich, and they're both doing evil things, when we can't compare the atrocities of US imperialism and British imperialism and French imperialism as well to the rise of China within the 20th century and the 21st century. I mean, even in the 19th century, in the 1800s, you had two opium wars. I think this is something that is not ever talked about in any mainstream media coverage. The first opium war from 1839 to 1842 between China and the United Kingdom, and the second opium war from 1856 to 1860 between China and France and England, during both of which the British imperialists, the colonialists, they grew opium in India and Bangladesh and what was already their colony, what they were colonizing, extracting resources, growing drugs, we're talking about the biggest drug traders, HSBC, this bank that we've heard of, right? Hong Kong Shanghai Bank Corporation, that was growing opium and poppy in the Golden Crescent in South Asia, and then using that to sell it to people in China to get them hooked on opiates, to get them hooked on drugs, to control their economy. And when the Chinese government at the time, granted it was a monarchy, I think it was the Qing dynasty, not necessarily the best or the most revolutionary government, but when they implemented nationalist policies to block the British from bringing drugs into their country, the British accused them of violating free trade, violating human rights, of not allowing liberty and freedom to come to your country. And obviously this liberty and freedom was drugs and vices that completely devastated the Chinese people. The Chinese people to this day call it the century of humiliation, the 19th century. So this is what China is lifting itself out of, right? China was for many centuries one of the poorest countries in Asia, despite being one of the most populated countries. And you're talking about a country that has battled Western imperialism financially, mediatically, spiritually, drugs, in every sense of the word. And now, going into the late 1800s, early 1900s, eventually it became the Republic of China. January 1st, 1912, it was established with Sun Yat-sen of the Kuomintang. I always mispronounce it, but the KMT. And the KMT had different political factions within it. There was a left wing of the KMT, there was a right wing. And ultimately, in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, during what some call the Chinese Civil War, there was a struggle between the left-wing faction, which became the Chinese Communist Party, led by Mao Zedong and others, against the right-wing pro-imperialist nationalist movement that were subservient to the Japanese imperialists. Eventually, 1949, the People's Republic of China is declared, with the Chinese Communist Party victorious. Again, after centuries of oppression by capitalism, by imperialism, the killing of millions of people. China had some of the worst death counts during World War II. We hear a lot about Europe during World War II, but almost no mention is made of Nanjing and Nanking and northeastern China, especially, that had a lot of casualties from the imperialism. And so this is what China's lifting itself out of. And I just wanted to kind of make those brief historical points because none of this is mentioned in mainstream media. And what the imperialists do through omission is that when you take out key facts like that, you're completely changing the narrative. Like if I were to walk outside into the street and see two guys fighting each other, and the first thing I'll think of is, okay, maybe, who knows, they're both equally bad. Come on, guys, stop the fighting. But if we don't know the context and say, hey, wait a second, this one guy has been was being robbed and beat up for the past 15 minutes, and the other guy is the one beating him up. How am I going to go and act like both of them are equals when one side is clearly the aggressor? And so that's kind of the historical background and context that we need. Same could be applied as well for Israel, Palestine, but that's a whole different conversation. But going into talking about, you mentioned a key term, the Belt and Road Initiative, which is one of the ways that the People's Republic of China and the Chinese Communist Party have been able to develop their economy. In 1978 and 1979, with reform and opening up, the Chinese Communist Party understood that we couldn't follow the traditional Soviet command-style economy that exists in the Soviet Union and other countries, because we would avoid some big economic chaos, especially with the new maneuvers of the imperialists. And so we have to open up temporarily our economy, restructure in a way that has some private enterprise under the control of the Communist Party. And this has created a lot of controversy, even within the left, even between us as leftists, because us as leftists, as principled anti-imperialists, we defend China, but a lot of people on the left attack us or attack China for being revisionist or being, capitalist and stuff like that. And so part of that narrative is this idea that China is imperialist, that China is putting countries under debt to control them. And so I want to play a clip of a video from Axios, which talks about this so-called debt trap, the Chinese debt trap. And it's a term that you're going to hear a lot in mainstream media. I've seen it over and over and over again, the Chinese debt trap about Africa, Latin America. And so here's a quick clip, and I want to get your reaction and response, comrade, because I know this is something that we're seeing a lot.
One big thing, China's leader Xi Jinping is looking to make China the global superpower by 2050. But it may come at a major cost to some developing nations. In 2013, Xi announced his multi-trillion-dollar Belt and Road Initiative, where China would build infrastructure projects throughout Eurasia.
The China debt trap is this pattern we're seeing around the world where China goes into a small country that really needs infrastructure and offers to build it, but when that country can't repay China, they use that debt to leverage influence.
Countries like Angola, Sri Lanka, and Djibouti have all fallen into this trap. Now Angola is paying China with its oil. Sri Lanka is leasing a port to China for 99 years. And in Djibouti, China now has its first overseas military base. Part of Xi Jinping's grand strategy is the culmination of 3 eras of modern China. Mao founded the People's Republic. Deng made it prosperous. But Xi wants to take China center stage on a global scale. And Trump's America First policy is helping make that happen. Trump has alienated allies by leaving several major international agreements. And that's given China the ability to fill that power vacuum.
China is advancing these foreign influence campaigns in small countries all over the world and getting closer and closer to US shores. If China lives out President Xi Jinping's vision and topples the US as a superpower, it'll be the first time in modern history that a non-democratic country has this position.
I like how she calls it a non-democratic country without even no question about it. And we're talking about the U.S. imperialist government, 2-party dictatorship, and she has the gall to call China undemocratic.
Seriously.
Comrade, what's your reaction, response to all this, and maybe tell us a little bit more about the reality of the Belt and Road Initiative?
Sure. Initial reactions is disgust about the liberalism. Makes me want to gag. In all honesty, the liberalism that is shown there is very. It seems left, but in actuality, it just preserves the capitalistic establishment. You see little bits and pieces of how they blame Trump for putting America behind, when in reality, it's their capitalist system itself in decay, that and their immovable stance on why socialism is bad and whatnot, and how they're not evolving. Is the reason why they are lagging behind China. It's not Trump's fault necessarily that, they're going through this fascistic sort of stance with a little bit of liberalism now with Joe Biden. By the way, Joe Biden hasn't really changed many or reversed many of the policies that Trump has put in. But going back to China and that clip, it's stunning almost to see that they like to point out in, for example, Sri Lanka and I think it was Djibouti and Ethiopia, and how, a military base and a port for 99 years, those two things are imperializing. They're taking over the world. And I want to compare what the West has done over the 100 years, the several centuries of colonialism, neocolonialism, and everything else, when they, when comparing what China is doing. I haven't really studied much about Ethiopia, why there's a quote unquote military base. But when it came to Sri Lanka, there was a problem with the loans that they were giving out to Sri Lanka. However, it was negotiated extremely fairly with the Sri Lankan government, and they actually did get money for the port, and they are getting money from the Chinese government for leasing the port. Yes, I'm not sure it's 99 years or whatnot, but the media portrays it as, oh, you default on your loans, then, now it's ours. And it's like, no, it wasn't like that at all. There were several negotiations between the Sri Lankan government and the Chinese government that, so that they made basically a deal to where, the Chinese government basically paid Sri Lanka to get the port. These sorts of stories are not included in clips like that. Whereas, they manifest it in a way that the Belt and Road Initiative is some sort of scheme for China to take over the world, because white Western hegemony just really is threatened by anybody that may be rising on top. And to your point, to saying like a non-Western country to be on top like this, that's completely unacceptable. Again, that is just perpetuating this imperialistic cookie cutter white dominance that is expected from Western society, thinking that they were the best, and now they are shocked that somebody, and I think they are truly shocked, because they've never seen China like this. They never expected China to grow like this. They never thought that little semi-feudal 1949 China that was going through their cultural revolutions and famines and everything could ever be the rising superpower that they are today, and making trade deals and getting trillions of dollars through their markets every year. A socialist communist country and everything is doing this and is outcompeting the United States. Now they're trying to slow their rise, which is not working, obviously. China will continue to rise, and it's inevitable that they're going to be the largest economy coming up. And the Belt and Road Initiative is really the biggest challenge to Western hegemony in human history. And to even say that China is challenging Western liberal capitalisms and democracies without firing a gun is a wonderful sort of not karma. It's what's it called? It's a
Revenge,
wonderful,
or like yeah. It's like a
contradiction.
It's right.
It's not a contradiction. I mean, it's a wonderful, like, serving them their just desserts. As it's ironic almost that they'll be able to do that. But in reality, China has struggled so much, and to see them succeed the way that they are now, and not only seeing them succeed, but actually extending a hand to the global South, saying, hey, we did this for you. You can follow our pathway. Deng Xiaoping literally stated, this is a pathway for you all to follow, especially using socialism, but we're not exporting revolutions here. We're trying to kind of show a pathway to at least to develop your own societies in that the way that we did and the way that we're prospering now. And you don't need the United States, you don't need the West, you can actually do it yourself. We did it with the West by accepting foreign investments and whatnot. And you did have the Cold War where the United States was thinking, oh, China is kind of liberalizing, and not understanding what Deng Xiaoping's ardent stance against liberalism was, and to their own fault. So to see that they're leaving this manufacturer of the world and becoming a new superpower through the economy, and through Deng Xiaoping's opening up and Xi Jinping's leadership in placing them in the global stage to continue with our growth, is phenomenal. And I think that's just, ever since the fall of the Soviet Union, the heavy burden that China has now to show how socialism can work in this new era is extremely important, and how the global South is not only taking advantage of that, but is now prospering with its shackles being released through their Belt and Road Initiative, through their deals, and really developing in a way never before seen in the Westerners' eyes. I'm sorry to go on this rant, but those cool. Types of videos were just truly
it's always like it's always like the liberal hipsters drinking like soy lattes, and or like they approach it from this, like you said, but I think it's important. You made a great point, because it's not coming from a type of right-wing conservative Republican perspective. It's like they throw on some young hipsters to talk about like Chinese imperialism and hegemony, and it's coming from the left. And we'll talk about that in a little bit, the new optics of attacking China from the left. And it's interesting that cuando le convienen, right, when it interests them, they attack China. They accuse it either of being capitalist when its successes are like, oh, it's successful because of capitalism. But then when it comes time to like critiquing China, they're like, you see, that's communism. This is so it's interesting how they use wordplay to attack China. And some really good comments from the comrades watching and listening. Thanks again to all the comrades that are on here. Brewski McKilgore had a good analogy for what you were talking about, comrade, poetic justice, that this is indeed a great example of poetic justice. Chickens coming home to roost, says Dust James. Shout out to Connor Gillis. Shout out to Radcon Engels. Shout out to everybody that's watching and listening. And I think what's really interesting is that Xi Jinping doesn't get a lot of the credit that he deserves for his carrying out this amazing project, the One Belt, One Road initiative. I mean, I was reading part of his speech, and I believe it was in Kazakhstan or Uzbekistan in 2012 or 2013 when he was first really initiating this project. And it's really beautiful because he uses very Marxist terminology. And this is again from The Governance of China. I highly recommend folks read that book because a lot of times in the racist imperialist media, we never hear from Chinese people themselves talk about their own revolution and progress. And that's part of the media war against China. But one of the things that Xi Jinping talks about in his conceptualization of the Chinese Dream and the Belt and Road Initiative is the negation of the negation, which is a term in Marxism that represents the finalization of a contradiction, but on a new and higher level. For example, if you're doing a cartwheel, you start off in one position like this with your hands up. Then you end up the antithesis of that, which is with your hands on the ground and your feet up in the air. So that's the negation of the first contradiction. And then the negation of the negation is you're back on your feet with your hands up again, but you're in a new place. And we apply that same analogy to the construction of socialism and communism, where we have primitive communism, what some would call primitive communism, or early germs of communism, collective society, pre-capitalism. Then we moved into a class society, which we're in now under capitalism. And eventually we'll get to communism, which is the negation of class society. And a new and higher level, we're collective again, but on a new technological basis, based on abundance, based on material wealth and resources. Socialism has to be based on wealth. It's not about going backward, it's about going forward. Xi Jinping talks about that in the Belt and Road Initiative, that we need to have wealth and prosperity in order to build socialism. And interestingly enough, another point about the Belt and Road Initiative is that it builds on what existed thousands of years ago when we're talking about the Silk Road. That's why one of the other terms that's used is the New Silk Road, because back in the day, hundreds of years ago, during the Middle Ages, when Europe was on the decline and China was on the rise, we had the Silk Road that went from China connecting all the way to Europe. And that's when the Chinese trade began expanding and civilization began growing. Eventually that declined, but now there's the New Silk Road, which is the negation of the old Silk Road. And so Xi Jinping uses a lot of like it's very subtle too. He doesn't use it in a way that's very academic-y or like very like Western and chauvinist. He uses it in a way that's very simple to understand. And in the way he talks to the Chinese people, he's like, look, we will be prosperous again. We will, and kind of like, I don't want to say like kind of like MAGA, like Make America Great Again, but in a way that's more revolutionary. It's not based on like, colonization and imperialism.
I really do want to touch on that too. I'm glad you started to notice this as well, because when I was doing, when we were doing our China 2050 and really starting to study the terms, it wasn't just slogans. Xi Jinping is not just using slogans to kind of describe what they're doing. They're scientific. Even the term socialism with Chinese characteristics has a huge history of understanding what, this is still socialism, but why Chinese characteristics is important in understanding the entire system. We can't just, socialism with Chinese characteristics is socialism in China. But it's not just that, when you start to understand the century of humiliation to the Chinese Revolution, to the Great Leap Forward and Cultural Revolution and Deng Xiaoping's reforms, then you start to see a holistic sort of sense like, oh, Chinese characteristics is actually studying the conditions of a country that has gone through such a unique experience and is attempting to reach is on a socialist pathway and is trying to go through its own way. rather than, the Soviet Union model that, uses centralized planning and whatnot. There was actually a nifty chart that I retweeted on explaining this. I'll try to send it to you. Maybe you can put
see
it
if I
up.
could pull it up. Yeah.
Because it really did explain very well on basically what's wait a minute. It really did explain super well how hold up here.
Yeah, that's really
And I'll
cool.
send it to the chat too right here.
Cool. Let's pull this up.
Yeah, that chart was really kind of showed how the primary stage of socialism, something that Deng Xiaoping was really adamant about, that they are just in those primary stages and they had to use certain market mechanisms in order to grow their productive forces and things like that. It was really important to understand. You have all these sorts of stages in socialism, which is going to take time. And I'm really glad, actually, we did touch upon it in our China 2050 video, because it does, explain modern capitalism, what most of the world is still using, the primary stage of socialism, where China is right now and is trying to move forward from there. I mean, this is the plan. This is not just some plot for the CPC to stay in power while there's financial oligarchs in their party that they just want to keep capitalism and excuse capitalism, blah blah blah. You have the modern capitalism, primary stage of socialism, and you see the system of property rights, and it has various forms, system of distribution. Right now, China is a market-based distribution according to the labor. And according to labor, which is different from modern capitalism, which is according to capital. And we see that not only from businesses trying to delegate, what's most profitable for them, but we're also seeing that in the imperialist stage with the excess capital going abroad. And then we're seeing the system of regulation, state-directed market economy. Obviously, this isn't pure capitalist as libertarians would love to have. There is some governments that are trying to regulate it, but in a sense that benefits the capitalists, not in the sense that it benefits the people. In China, state-dominated market economy, the state is in control. Like last week, I think there was I bookmarked it on my Twitter. There was a huge billionaire that got arrested, and the state seized all the assets and basically nationalized the company, $1 billion company. Yeah, Chinese billionaire arrested and business seized by state. I'll also send that too. But for the most part, this is what it means by state-dominated market economy. Nobody's above the state. Nobody is above the Politburo or the CPC. And from what you all can see from intermediate stage, advanced stage, and communism, these are all Chinese concepts, and these are actually plotted out in China's plan to move forward. The intermediate stage of socialism is going to happen from I think it's the anniversary of the Chinese Revolution, 100-year anniversary in 2050, and it's going to be going on till apparently 2077, and from 2077 on to 2020, or not 2100, we're going to be reaching the advanced stages of socialism. Communism still not planned yet. We still don't know how that's going to look like, but please tell me what other system actually plans for the next 100 years. What system plan? I mean, it's so scientific. This isn't just hoopla. This is actually happening now. And that's the beautiful eloquence of what China is doing and why it's so important. How, even though they're not following the Soviet Union model, they are actually still planning their economy and planning their society in a very intricate and involved way. So it's beautiful. Please, everybody, please do not only appreciate it, but go in head first with all this, because there's just so much information to grab here.
It's beautiful to see that. And it's so methodical. It's so well planned. And it just is a reality check for a lot of the chauvinistic Western leftists who claim that China is just, they're just these bumbling idiots. And it's a lot of racism too. I think people tend to view Chinese people in a certain way that is problematic and very racist. And it just goes to show you, like you said, this is scientific socialism. This is understanding that if the conditions change, even as Lenin himself says, right, if the conditions change, the tactics have to change. And the brilliance of the Chinese Communist Party in the late 70s, especially 1978, 1979, was the ability of seeing the shifts in global imperialism, the new strategies, the new tactics, the fact that you do have to open up certain sectors, change and adapt. And they did that, and they're able to continue doing that. And interestingly enough, even the Soviet Union had a new economic policy for 10 years where they temporarily allowed private enterprise in order to grow, have a micro stage of capitalism. And China understands the long game. China understands that in order to build socialism and communism, it's going to take hundreds, if not thousands of years. And they're fine with that because they have a long-term civilizational view of thousands of years. I mean, China is older than the US multiplied by like 5 or 6 times, you know? And so it's just beautiful to see that. And we have to humble ourselves as those communists or leftists in the West to actually study what the Chinese people are doing, to study socialism with Chinese characteristics, have respect for it, and see how we can apply that in Latin America and the Caribbean, Africa, Asia. Imagine in Latin America if we could have something like that, or in Africa, or you know, other parts of Asia. And so, touching on that point on the economic successes, here's one video I wanted to share with y'all from CGTN. And I know the first thing that people say, that's government propaganda, that's state media. But it's like, here's the thing, like, we never hear from the side of the Chinese people speaking for themselves. People have no problem watching corporate media, watching Vice, watching all this garbage and nonsense that's funded by the banking institutions, the economists that are all invested in overthrowing China. They have no problem with that. That's a reputable source. But the Chinese people speaking for themselves is propaganda. Again, one of the racist talking points against China. But here's a really beautiful video that I found. It's subtitled. I'm going to read some of the subtitles. It's called Eradicating Absolute Poverty, the China Miracle in the History of World Poverty Alleviation. So let's hear.
光点亮人世间，传递着现代文明的温暖与明亮。
Okay.
但在广袤的
But in many rural areas, tens of thousands of people used to live in poverty. The first time I saw an actual television is when I was 18. I thought to myself, would it one day be possible to watch TV in my own home? I hope that one day we can leave the mountain and study in the city. These are kids talking in the rural areas. In building a moderately prosperous society in all respects, no one should be lesser. This is Xi Jinping. To achieve common prosperity for all, no one should be left behind. Between the end of 2012 and the end of 2019, 7 years, 61,320 hours, 93.48 million people were lifted out of poverty. That's 1,500 people every hour. The fact that China... Oh, okay.
Move hundreds of millions of people.
This is Antonio Gutierrez, the UN head.
Now a very clear target to fully eradicate extreme poverty in China in 2020. So this is the most important contribution.
By the end of 2020, China has eradicated absolute poverty. These are the achievements of China, a miracle in the history of world poverty alleviation. So that's a beautiful clip. I'm not going to play the full thing, but if you guys want to look that up, it's on CGTN, talking about poverty alleviation, showing the faces of the Chinese people, because a lot of times China showed in a very monolithic way, in a dehumanized way, where they're just shown as a dragon or a faceless beast or empire. These are real people. I actually got a chance to visit China. Me and my girlfriend, Ophelia, in 2019, we went to China, to Beijing, Shanghai. We rode on the magnet train that goes like super fast. It was crazy.
Wow,
and it was
really?
cool. Yeah, we actually got to go to the village where the Chinese Red Army started in the
Wow.
20s, I believe, in Xinjiang, where Mao was
Wow.
at. We visited all the areas. And it was interesting because when we were in the village, me and my girlfriend's Mexican, Ophelia, we were walking, and this is like a remote Chinese village, right, of the Chinese Revolution. And all of a sudden, we see a huge Mexican peso, a silver coin, like a statue of it. And we're like, huh, what's going on? Like, that's
Wow.
really interesting. You see the eagle with the snake in its mouth. And we learn about how this is the era of revolutionary Mexico during the Mexican Revolution, and how they used coins from revolutionary Mexico to trade within the communes in China at that time period.
Wow.
I don't know how the coins
Interesting.
got there, but that was like really cool because there's connections between the Mexican Revolution and the Chinese Revolution,
Yeah.
contemporaries, you know what I'm saying? So that video was really cool. I got to see China firsthand, and for me, it was like going to the future. Like for me, it was seeing like, wow, like this is abundance, this is wealth. And contrary to a lot of the stereotypes about China being dirty and cramped, and it was the cleanest place. I'm from New York, like born and raised in New York. I live in LA now, but Beijing is like twice the size of New York and way cleaner. So
Yep.
it was just really cool to see that. But comrade, why don't you talk a little bit about poverty alleviation, how the Chinese economic model of socialism adapted to Chinese characteristics has been able to lift that?
Sure. And it's really touching, for both of us, I guess you can say, because, at least for me, seeing not only our cities, but our families and communities go through such poverty is really, there's a scar. Poverty is, especially when a society can and does have the ability to alleviate poverty, but it doesn't. Rather, it puts its capital towards making more capital. It really does. It really does hurt a lot, as especially as minorities here, trying to alleviate ourselves from this oppression, and both societal and economical. When I see China, and this is initially why I really liked researching about China, was because of their poverty alleviation. And when I say, back in 2012, Xi Jinping really did have this momentum of putting in the forefront the lowest and the poorest. And no matter if they are a minority, no matter if how low and poor they are, how are they going to lift the standards of living for everybody to move forward with the country? And because the biggest thing during Hu Jintao and Zemin, I don't know how to pronounce his name, sorry comrades, but the prior presidents, they had this problem of the gap between the rich and the poor, the urban and the rural, and how to spread the prosperity out as much as possible. They laid the foundations for Xi Jinping to solve it through the poverty alleviation by not only giving them wages and jobs, and to have their incomes grow, but also material things. I really get frustrated when people kind of dismiss China's poverty alleviation efforts by saying, "Oh, that absolute poverty is just $1.90 a day according to the UN standards, and China just got it just above that, $1.93, and people are still poor." It's like, no, China's poverty alleviation commissions do more than just track income. Income is important, but they want to see if they have running water, if they have a roof over their head, if they're still living in mud huts, or if they're living in the housing that they built. The investment, I think, is about like $70 billion in new housing for poverty alleviation. And that sort of mimics what, not to get sidetracked, but what Venezuela has done for housing, and give 200 million people, or 2 million people, housing, modern housing on top of that. And this isn't just only running water. This is actual modern amenities in the household that people can use. And people are expected to sort of work, but they offer job placement and job training programs for people to continue to produce for society, while older generations don't have to worry about it. And this is one of the things that I really want to touch on. I actually talked about it a little while back, and I mentioned it in my other live stream, is that when I was rereading Lenin's Imperialist, the highest stage of capitalism, he did mention the fact that, if capitalist countries are able to use their surpluses to increase the standard of living, poverty wouldn't be in such a devastating sort of I think I found it here actually. Poverty wouldn't be just as devastating. It would alleviate itself and people can move forward, but it wouldn't be called capitalism if capitalism did that. Capitalism doesn't use its surplus for its people. It uses it for more surplus. And that was the biggest, like I said, this isn't the tell-all be-all of Lenin saying that China isn't socialist because they don't use their surplus only to, export capital and make them grow. The purpose of China exporting capital isn't to make more capital. And this is my frustration, and we're probably going to touch upon this a little bit more, when they say China is imperialist, because in reality, China exports capital for its people, and they try to reach out to the other developing countries and saying, hey, we would love for you to be able to get the resources that you need, but at the same time, we're going to treat you as equals. We're not going to exploit you through our military, through force. We're not going to kind of kidnap your people or assassinate your political leaders in order to get what we want. We want to make sure that you're getting compensated, and what we're getting what we need for our people over here. Our development is more geared towards making sure everybody's okay, rather than making a profit for profit's sake. And I really, this is the fundamental difference that we're seeing. And, there's a lot of things that we have to explain when it comes to that. Like, how is a state-run enterprise different from a multinational corporation? Obviously, they're different in the profit sense sort of way, but a lot of people saying that state-owned enterprises and private companies are the exact same thing as the way capitalism is run in the United States. They say the same thing about billionaires and things like that, and it's obviously not true. But to go back to the poverty alleviation and seeing how China is really taking care of their people, it does show that they're continuing to go on this Marxist pathway to I'm sorry, I think I've been sending you the wrong one.
It's cool, no worries. Yeah. No, it's cool that you mentioned that, because it also it debunks a lot of the anarchist and ultra left positions on socialism, that a lot of the ultra lefts, the anarchists, the people who believe that China is imperialist, they don't understand that socialism is a development, is a process, is something that takes time, that you need to build over a period of time. And even just rereading Lenin's old work and original work, you can see that he talks about building a moderately prosperous society. Let me just pull up this tweet now.
Sure. So this is really the big quote that I was referencing earlier, because when we study China, it's obviously going on the pathway that Lenin kind of described here. But as he says here, as long as capitalism remains what it is. Surplus capital will be utilized not for the purpose of raising the standard of living of the masses in a given country, for that would mean a decline in profits for the capitalists, but for the purpose of increasing profits by exporting capital abroad to backward countries. This is the, like I said, this isn't the end all be all that of China is a capitalist. I mean, there's so many other things that we have to consider. But when you read this, and if you still think China is capitalist when it's alleviated poverty for its 1.4 billion people, it's increased standards of living, education, healthcare, and everything like that, miles and leaps from what, the United States welfare system. The United States welfare system is for appeasement. It's not for the people. It's for appeasement. It's for stagnation, and they only did that as a compromise to keep the masses in line, whereas over here, we obviously see that capitalism still necessitates poor people, and they use that extra surplus to get more surplus rather than helping the masses. So we're also reading Neocolonialism as well, and the extensiveness of how imperialism evolved from colonialism to neocolonialism, where the Western powers have this entire history of exploitation to say, hey, wait a minute, we actually don't need to control their governments and everything. We have the money and we can control, their top people and say where they need to go and what they need to do. And that's how they continue their neocolonialism, instead of doing, what Frantz Fanon wanted was, a revolution, and to get the reparations that they needed from the from their exploiters, and to rebuild their society, and even in neocolonialism, they were saying, export capital to be invested in our countries is not bad. It's the fact that we need that export capital to develop and use it on our own terms rather than the capitalist terms, especially if the exported capital comes from a colonizer power, because they have taken our value, and I wish I can, I didn't put up a screenshot of that, but that's up and coming for our next debunk video. But long story short, China's poverty alleviation is more than just poverty alleviation. It shows the rest of the world that China is socialist. It is taking care of its people and putting people first. And if you see this more as a way to, I just don't see how they're trying to make a profit off lifting poor people from poverty, and doing all this, when in reality, even Lenin said this, So yeah, that's my 2 cents about that.
Yeah, and I think that's a great economic and scientific explanation of why China is socialist. A lot of times people who are neutral socialism or ultra left, they'll use very aesthetic or they'll use appearances to try to debunk the fact that China is socialist. They'll say, look, there's companies, there's commodities, there's people using cell phones, there are people with brand names, there's McDonald's, without really understanding the fundamental economic basis of socialism. One of them being an economy, like you said, centered around use values, things that are useful, housing, food, healthcare. When I went to China, I didn't see a single homeless person. I didn't see people starving. Like, they have the economies, and the economy and the commodities that are produced are first and foremost organized around fulfilling the use values of people, feeding people, housing people, nourishing people, putting clothes on their back. Yes, there are commodities that only have exchange value, or commodities that just provide a pleasure, a service for fun, right? Amusement parks, video games. Yes, that does exist. But that exists because the basic needs of that society are organized around, first and foremost, addressing what people need, the 5 things, like housing, healthcare, education, food, everything else, right? And
it's economic development. It's producing the productive forces, and we have to. China was really realistic in not closing off its marketplace to the globe when the majority powers are still capitalist, but still maintaining a socialistic and communistic dictatorship. It was extremely important in order for, what you were talking about, the people-centered approach with their economy. That's what Xi Jinping coined this as. Despite having commodities that are just for the sake of commodities and whatnot, in this this marketplace is mostly a closed system controlled by the state, and the state focuses on people. And when that is set and is constantly evolving, then we're going to start to see how, unfortunately, I wish I was going to be alive to see it. But I do think that once China is they're already on the pathway, but once they're more advanced on the pathway, it's going to be a phenomenal communist country for the years to come. So,
not to get on the kooky side, but I think that when it comes time for humans to interact with aliens and UFOs, I would want China to represent humanity and not the United States, because the United States would probably just want to blow up whatever it comes out there. But exploit them or build a McDonald's on Mars. But it's just really inspiring to see the Chinese people build that model of socialism. I think Mao, but also Deng and Xi Jinping are going to go down in history as just brilliant leaders, statesmen, and tacticians. Pivoting a little bit, because I know we were able to talk a lot about the economics, and I think you did a great job at debunking the claims that China is capitalist, but also from the opposite approach that it isn't socialist. And I think we're able to affirm that China is socialist. It's building socialism with Chinese characteristics. One of the other attacks, one of the other fronts of the media war against China is the claim that China is racist, more specifically that there's an ethnic cleansing of the Uyghurs, the Muslim Turkic ethnic group in Western China. I just want to play a short clip from The Guardian, kind of laying out some of the mainstream talking points. You see them everywhere, and just get your reactions on this, because I think this is something we're going to see a lot more in the coming weeks.
Sure.
There are many accounts of people who have had their relatives disappear into the camps, and we don't really know what's happening to them.
Can I ask you why people are kneeling, blindfolded and shaven and being led to trains in modern China? Why? What is going on there?
I do not know where you get this videotape.
The Uyghurs are a Turkic Muslim group. They live in the northwestern territory of Xinjiang in China, a region that is rich in resources like oil, natural gas, and copper. And it is a region that is also important to China politically because it was briefly independent in the 1940s. And since 1949, since it's been under Chinese control, there were various clashes and incidents of terrorism, both in Xinjiang and in other parts of China, either attributed to or claimed by Uyghur extremists. It seems to be that the Chinese authorities see Uyghurs and other Muslim minorities that are in Xinjiang, that they basically see them all as potential separatists or terrorists. So if you go to Xinjiang, it looks like somewhere that is in the middle of a civil war. There are checkpoints everywhere. There's armed police, military.
To be in Xinjiang means being checked every day, multiple times a day. When you go to a market, when you drive a car, when you take a train, even your smartphone is checked.
It is difficult to report there because you will be followed by state security agents that basically intimidate you and intimidate anybody that you try to speak to.
Why can't we ask some questions?
These police stations everywhere and, cameras, so many cameras.
The BBC has seen new, detailed satellite analysis of dozens of suspected camps across Xinjiang.
Wow, look at this. It's like a city.
The Chinese government claims that these camps are vocational training centers, and that people are not forced to go to them, that the detainees in them are not detainees but students.
Like most boarding school, students here take classes, play sports, and do all kinds of extracurriculum activities.
And they learn, marketable, employable skills, and they learn Chinese, and they come out, better off.
This is what it wants the world to see.
But we know from accounts from people who have been inside the camps that these camps are de facto prisons, and people have to go in them. They don't have a choice. They're separated from their families. And inside, they undergo basically political indoctrination. So that can include having to sit for hours and listen to speeches by Xi Jinping, or singing patriotic songs, or listening to lectures about the party. We also have heard of cases of torture. So people being strapped to something called a tiger chair for hours.
Each time I was electrocuted, my whole body would shake. I begged them to kill me.
There have also been reports of forced medication, forced sterilizations.
Mothers, fathers, siblings and lovers, all that disappeared. Their Uyghurs flung into Chinese camps. Their relatives say it's ethnic cleansing.
This is a crime against humanity, crime against the Uyghur people.
The US.
So that's part of the clip, and I'm not going to play the full thing, but this is what's coming, folks. People, we got to get ready for this, because I can see, I've already been seeing it. Comrade Barry of 415 has been writing and creating really great content around this. But this is how the new war against China is going to be escalated. You have to build a narrative, because U.S. imperialist strategy, they can't just go into a country, bomb the fuck out of it, and leave. They have to build a narrative. And this is part of that narrative of claiming that there's ethnic cleansing, racism. So much to go over, but Comrade, your reaction to this report.
I don't know how many times I've seen this sort of propaganda on repeat. Right. It's nothing new. But I really want to mention, this is probably one of the quote-unquote best propaganda that we see on Xinjiang. But when we compare this to Palestine and what Israel is doing to Palestine, it's night and day. Okay, they love to put up the people to talk, their Uyghurs that have been in the prison to talk about their experiences in front of Congress and everything. But we actually see Palestinians almost every single day being bombed, being massacred, and their oppression. There's no think tank behind that. There's no academic behind these Palestinians that are suffering. It's real life, and we're seeing real life apartheid happening in Israel. But when we see Xinjiang and their people that they're living normal lives, but it's all a ruse, because somehow, some way, the vocational camps are concentration camps and everything like that. It's just it's really stunning how people can see, how even people can say what's happening in Israel, China is doing the exact same thing to Uyghurs. And I'm just completely, frustrated with that. But here's the thing. It's not hypocrisy. It's imperialism. United States protects Israel because they need to protect their interests in the Middle East, and Israel is the best way to do it. They pump billions of dollars to fund their military, to make sure their military wins, and nobody messes around with them. China is an enemy. China, despite having markets available for capitalists around the world, they would rather carpet bomb China to liberate the Uyghurs than to be subservient to the CPC while doing business in their markets. That's how nasty and evil imperialism, capitalism works here, and when we see the double standards between what is going on in Israel compared to Xinjiang, it's it's planned. It's not, some subconscious, oh, I don't know what you're talking about. They know exactly what we're talking about. And it's, more about profits on where one can profit rather than, the concern of Uyghurs. It's such absolute BS. They don't care about Muslim lives. What happened to the Palestinians? What happened to them? They're getting massacred on the streets by soldiers. In any of those videos that we just saw, did we see a PLA soldier shoot somebody? Did we see one of their mosques get blown up? In any of that, did we see any person get beaten live on camera compared to an IDF soldier shooting a family? I don't know how many times we're going to see how BBC and The Guardian and all these other outlets are going to spin this phony genocide narrative when now we have actual proof of what apartheid and genocide really looks like to a native Muslim people, and that was, tomorrow, actually, we're going to publish our video exactly on that. And I am just as energetic now as you'll see me on the video. So, it really does call out this BS. And I really hope leftists start to put 2 and 2 together, saying, wait a minute, I didn't see that in Xinjiang. I didn't see that in what I seen in Palestine. Maybe there is a point to it, And on top of, I did see this on Twitter, a Uyghur activist saying that, Palestinians have it better because they are able to criticize the Zionists, whereas they can't criticize China. And I'm like, wow.
Oh my God.
I think a Palestinian would love to go to Xinjiang
Right.
and live there with their family peacefully, not getting bombed or not doing anything, compared to what's going on in Gaza, And to one more thing, when they kind of complain about the terrorist attacks, happening in Xinjiang, first off, these are actual extremists that are trained outside of Xinjiang, and it has apparently there was a CIA whistleblower and a number of military professionals confirming that United States wants that. United States really tried to train extremists, Uyghur extremists, to go back to Xinjiang and cause a ruckus, to say the least, because they want to destabilize China and their influence in Central Asia. I think the person's name was Sibel Iman, and she blew the whistle on what's going on in Xinjiang. And when you have constant terrorist attacks that are killing hundreds of people from 1990 all the way through 2014 and 15, obviously security has to be in the utmost importance. While, but you're not invading Iraq or you're not invading Afghanistan and making a white supremacy campaign on how Muslim people are uncivilized. You're actually de-radicalizing them through education. And Malaysia, Indonesia, and even France now are using the educational model that China has been using their vocational schools to de-radicalize. This isn't something new, and this isn't, a cultural genocide either. They still have their languages all over the place that they teach in schools as well. They still have their culture all around. It's very frustrating that this narrative is winning. But I really hope, compared to, I think we can, like you said, a lot of people are probably going to pivot from Palestine back to Xinjiang and saying, we need to help them now.
Mm-hmm.
But now we got the truth of what actual genocide looks like. And that's what I'm trying to drill home here. China is not doing what Israel is doing. And what, and compared to what the West has done with the Native American population and everything else, I really hope people start seeing and connecting those dots when, if they ever come at us to saying, if you care about Palestine, you care about Uyghurs. It's like, no. Don't you ever make that comparison.
And I see it happening already. That's the crazy part, comrade. It's like, I already see that shit happening. And it's really concerning. And I think I'm glad you also mentioned the geopolitical implications of it, because one of my favorite things to do, I did this in one of our podcasts with Comrade Julie from Black Alliance for Peace. Shout out to Black Alliance for Peace and Comrade Julie. We did a show on Afghanistan and the U.S. quote unquote withdrawal of troops, how it's bullshit, basically. And what's interesting is that we have to take a moment to actually just sit down and look at a map. I think that's something that a lot of times in the US and in the left in general, we don't take enough time to really look at maps and strategize the way that imperialists do, because that helps us get a better sense of why certain regions are being targeted, why Xinjiang, why Western China, a region that many people may not have thought of before. And even just looking at this map that we're looking at right now, Xinjiang is right in the center of the chessboard. If you want to control the Eurasian continent, Europe and Asia, especially Russia and China, which are the US's biggest enemies, you control Xinjiang. And Xinjiang borders to the north. You can't see it on this map, but we're right here where this arrow is a very small sliver that connects to Russia. So not only borders Russia, which is one of the US's biggest enemies, but it's also in China, in a western part of China that is ethnically Turkic, a Turkic peoples that belong to Central Asia, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, which are these countries right here. And if we look to southwest of Xinjiang, we see Pakistan and Afghanistan. And it just so happens that these northeastern parts of Afghanistan and Pakistan that border Xinjiang are where the Taliban are. Remember those guys, the guys who the US funded and helped grow opium and poppy seeds during the 1970s to take down the Soviet Union and to try to overthrow China?
Yep.
Yeah, that's where the Taliban is based, in northeastern Afghanistan and Pakistan. It borders Xinjiang. It borders also Tibet to the south, which is another province of China that historically is China, that the US has been fomenting separatist violence in. And so it's strategically low, and it's also at the very crossroads, the entrance of the Belt and Road, of the Silk Road, that takes you from Beijing westward into Central Asia, toward Europe, and toward the Middle East. And it also is the blockage between China and Pakistan, where China and Pakistan have been trading, building the China-Pak friendship corridor that allows China to ship goods from the east coast of China into Pakistan, into I think it's the Persian Gulf. I can't remember what Gulf that is that borders Pakistan. But basically, it allows China and other countries that are sanctioned to circumvent the South China Sea, where the U.S. troops are stationed, and trying to overthrow that region, trying to foment separatism in Taiwan, which is also part of China. And so this is, if you look at this map, it's a chessboard. You know what I'm saying? And yeah.
And if you notice Taiwan, it's kind of checkered in this map.
Right.
Like Western media is always never going to admit that. But yeah, you're right. And that's a perfect analogy. This is a chessboard for the United States, when in reality, the United States has absolutely no business to get involved in sovereign territories like this. But this is how imperialism works. And they're going to continue to try to mess up Xinjiang. I mean, I don't know how many balkanization maps I've seen of China that make, these things, these regions their own countries, and that's the scary part, because that's what the United States wants. Balkanization is an effective tool to open up markets, open up areas for capitalists. And that was one of the things that China realized, and saying, if we ever break up, we're going to be sand, that falls. We're not going to be united. We're not going to be tough. We're not going to be strong. And it's under the CPC that they finally are strong, that they are united, and these regions are able to free themselves from, either past archaic traditional societies, like, I know Tibet had these feudal societies that put people, that they were still using slaves, and they had a tier system that really limited a lot of people until the CPC came to liberate them. all the way through Hong Kong, the liberation of Hong Kong in 1977 or 1997. And hopefully it's all going to be united, but obviously there's going to be wars. There may be a little wars about it, so to speak, but I think China is going to be more than ready to continue their unity path. And I don't know, their narratives, despite it having effect on Westerners, are not having effect in over there. I think that's going to be a really, you can foment whatever opposition you want over here, but that's the beauty of communistic societies, whether it's Cuba and the Bay of Pigs all the way to the farmers of Vietnam defeating one of the most powerful empires in the world. When you have the state organizing the defense of the people, it's going to be extremely difficult to overthrow. And imperialists are going to try their best to do what they need to do, but it's not going to work. So hopefully, with all that said, people start to realize that this sort of maneuver to either break up China and continue through this Uyghur genocide to kind of stroke their own white knightism is not going to go anywhere. I mean, this isn't the Nazi Holocaust, as if the United States actually cared about the Holocaust until it affected their bottom lines and Japan attacked. They actually, I heard that they knew about the Holocaust camps all throughout the war, and they didn't do anything until they actually had to get involved.
Right.
So to actually say that they would go in there to save Uyghur lives is laughable. They won't ever do that. It's more about profit than anything. And to say that people are motivated and sort of passionate about saving Uyghurs it can't be more disconnected from reality.
That's a great point, comrade. And on that note, I think we'll have to wrap up here. It's been really dope talking to you, man.
Sure.
I'm really looking forward to your video. Again, it's coming out tomorrow. For everybody who's watching and listening, please subscribe to Bay Area 415, Latino Marxist-Leninist attorney and host of the Comrade Report. Has really great content, not only about China, but Latin America, about Africa, Asia, socialism, communism. He has some really great content. And it's been really great to talk to you, man. I hope we can have another conversation soon. And peace out, everybody. I hope you guys have a great weekend. Take care.
Take care. Thanks for having me.
Take care.